What do you get when you take The Boys, you take out some of the crude humor, and then you put Studio Bones in charge? That's pretty much what you get with Super Crooks. This is a 13-episode series that is now available on Netflix. This is my thoughts on the series, so let's jump into it. Super Crooks follows a guy named Johnny Bolt, and at a young age, Johnny Bolt discovers that he has superpowers. He has the ability to control electricity, and he has these kind of desires to become this big superhero and actually go out and save the world and become popular. But unfortunately, after his debut, things don't really go well, and we jump forward to a time where he's now in the future, he's now grown up, and he's inside of this supervillain penitentiary that kind of houses strictly people with superpowers that have done crimes. And after getting freed from this prison, it seems like he's going to go back to, being a normal person and just live a normal life, but unfortunately, his friends kind of rope him right back into his exciting life of being a criminal, thinking that they can actually pull off a big heist. But again, things don't go well for him. This eventually leads to him getting roped in with this guy named Carmine, who is a past supervillain, and his big plot to make a boatload of money for him and everybody else that's going to work on the team. In addition to this, you learn about the Union of Justice, who is essentially the superheroes that's like an organization that's sole purpose is to take down bad guys. In addition to that, you have the Network of Villains, which is like this organization that's sole purpose is to essentially give jobs to the villains of this world, but in return, they get a 30% cut of whatever money is made. And of course, underneath all of that, just how everything is possibly interconnected and just how corrupt different groups are. As the story goes along, a lot of the concepts of the story really revolves around Johnny Bolt just trying to make it big. He's trying to make money, and he's just trying to get that one big heist that can kind of set him and his girlfriend Casey comfortable for the rest of their lives. But there's also an element to it of kind of that thrill of the heist itself. And that's something that also kind of extends to many people that work with Johnny Bolt. They just can't give up that thrill, that heist that they want to get that will make them a fortune. Even though initially the show really kind of centered around him being the hero, it never really kind of hits on that concept ever again, despite it having a feel early on of somebody that wanted to be a hero that never was. But despite this, most of the story kind of focuses more on the corruption of heroes versus villains, and the system itself kind of working to just make certain people rich. So my thoughts on the series. First and foremost, I am not a big fan of comics. I'm not a big comic book fan. I'm not a Marvel fan or anything like that. I dabbled a little bit when I was younger, so I might say some things that will offend some people regarding the source material of this. But honestly, I have watched The Boys. I watched the series on Amazon, and I couldn't help but this entire show feeling like I'm just watching The Boys, but with just less crude humor. Like just that usual, like over-the-top continuous sexual humor and stuff that was all over The Boys wasn't really present here. But it has the same feel to it. I mean, a lot of the more dire abilities that were used in this series pretty much felt like I was watching The Boys. It has that sense, this idea that the superheroes aren't really superheroes. They're corrupt. They're just crude and they're bad guys. This is the same as the villains. The sense that you feel like you relate more to the villains than you do the actual people that are the heroes. That kind of stuff, the corruption behind the scenes with the organizations, all that stuff really kind of seemed very similar. I think the only thing that you're really getting different here is that the main cast aren't really the same as you would get from The Boys. The Boys was more following people that didn't have superpowers that were trying to beat the people that had superpowers, whereas this one, the villains that you're following have their own superpowers. They're just, in most cases, not as good as those people that they're fighting, which are the heroes. And I do know that Super Crooks is based on a comic that I believe was made after The Boys, so I'm assuming there's probably a lot of inspiration there. This obviously was a comic done by Mark Miller, which I think is probably going to be the biggest issue that most people have with watching this show. If you are a big anime fan, you might like this show just for it being a fun show. It's a very Western show. Despite it being done by Bones, it just feels very Western. It has the visual style that's very Western. If I didn't know that this was done by Bones, I might not even know the fact that this is actually an anime. It really does feel like the guts and everything is very Western. It doesn't have any real anime trappings to it. Everything about it, the guts, the storytelling, the humor, everything really does feel Western in it. And so I think that's going to be a hard thing for a lot of people that are just big anime fans to really swallow. You're not going to get an anime here. You're going to get a Western comic book done by an anime studio. Honestly, the big trapping that I had for the show was because the seiyus that were behind it were really incredible. We have Kendra Suda is the main character, Johnny Bolt. You have his girlfriend being voiced by Maya Sakamoto, who is Casey. It does have a really solid voicing cast here, but again, besides that in the studio, very Western. But even with that said, I did enjoy this series. It had a lot of fun points in it. I will admit that early on in the show, just doesn't really pick up very quickly. It kind of took a while for me to really settle in with this show. Probably about halfway through the show did it finally start picking up, and things started moving forward. Because a lot of the earlier segments of the show is really about Johnny Bolt going back into society, doing a really quick heist, and then it going right back to him being kicked out. It really is a lot about Johnny trying to get back into the heisting, him screwing up and getting knocked down, then getting back into it. But even still, it did have some fun points in those early episodes. I really did especially like when they first met Praetorian and how that whole situation resolved. But I mean, that whole entire first segment just felt like it kind of dragged out. But I think once they meet Carmine and they get the main team together and they start moving forward with that whole situation, things do start to pick up. And I think the later segment of the series was definitely its best part. And what's interesting is I think my main issue that I have with the series overall is probably due to the characters and the chemistry. Now, the show itself has a great cast of characters. I like Johnny Bolt, probably mainly because I like Kendra Suda. Casey was fantastic. I think she was probably the best character of the show. Include with that TK, the Ghost, Forecast, and the two Diesel brothers. It has a lot of good characters that each individually have their own chemistry and their own flavor, but at the same time, the issue that comes, I think, overall with the show, and I think the reason why I kind of was pretty cold on it, is they don't really work well together. They don't chemistry well. Like, their chemistry itself, their interactions, the writing for the interactions between the characters isn't really there. And what I found really odd too is there was several points throughout the show where I felt like based on what one character says and how they feel, they'd walk away. But then it cuts a scene and they're there. And I always kind of wondered, well, maybe they'll cut forward and we'll find out that maybe Casey manipulated them. It never does. So I don't know if maybe stuff was cut to fit it into 13 episodes or something, but there was so many parts where the characters would say one thing and then they would do a different thing. And it would never explain it in something like, well, Casey manipulated them or somebody, talked them into it. It was always just kind of abrupt. I mean, if people are wondering, one example is when they go back to meet with the Ghost says, no, I'm doing this now. I don't want to get involved. And then scene cut and he's in the room. It's like, well, what happened there? Again, are we going to see Casey doing something to him or something? No, it never shows anything. So I don't know. There's a lot of weird writing mixed in with everything. But I think overall, it doesn't affect my enjoyment too much because I enjoyed individual characters. Like the Diesel brothers. They're dumb. They're obviously there so that somebody with really powerful abilities can actually kill somebody without actually killing somebody. But they were a lot of fun. They're wacky. But I think most people will probably find fault in them because there really is nothing to them. There's no story to them. There's nothing really kind of setting them aside from anybody, but just besides being just crazy. Forecast is great, but at the same time, you don't really learn anything about Forecast. The Ghost, you learn nothing about him. A lot of the backstory centers around Casey, Johnny Bolt, and Carmine. Honestly enough, I think the more interesting characters end up coming with the villains themselves. I think the Bastard, had some interesting story to him and Carmine. Praetorian was kind of fascinating with his ability and how random it was, even though technically it was always stuff that he needed, besides one time. Visually, I think the show is kind of hit and miss, whereas I think it looks good, but at the same time, there's two aspects that really kind of harm it. With the Western feel, it's very un-anime-ish. It's not a bad thing, but at the same time, there's a lot of points in which it just looks kind of ugly, especially when you have scenes like some of the character designs for a lot of the side characters, news broadcasters, just look really ugly, like just not good at all. And then mixing that with some decent but still rough CGI sequences, like the whole, even though it was funny, the zombie bicyclist, that stuff looked really rough, looked very robotic, and then having most of the action scenes regarding vehicles and stuff just be pure CGI. They did a decent job of blending it in, but it's still a little bit rough. Overall, I did enjoy the show. Now, it's not really pushing boundaries here. Again, there was a lot of writing that just felt very flat. A lot of the chemistry's not really there, but it does have a couple points in it that did some really cool stuff. I think if you like shows like The Great Pretender, this is definitely right up your alley. Again, shows like The Boys is probably going to be the best equivalent you have to an anime format for that type of series. And additionally, I think this is a show that if you have family members that aren't into anime, it might be a good show to kind of throw on if they like things like The Boys or just comic book shows in general. I just think that most anime fans are probably not going to be into the show just because of how Western it is, obviously because it's based off of a Western comic. But that's my thoughts on Super Crooks. If any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, leave a like down below, comment, let me know about the series if you're going to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already, share this video if you can, support us on Patreon or through the tips link in the description below. We definitely appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.